In this tutorial, I will show you how to create this Procedural Caution Stripes material in Blender. And then after I create the procedural material, I'm going to show you how to join the material together into this custom node with all of these custom sliders. And the sliders will also be right over here on the side panel. So we have color 1 and color 2, and so you can change these colors to change the colors of the stripes. We also have the scale to change the entire scale of the texture, and then we also just have the stripe scale to change the size of the stripes. And also the stripes offset. Then we also have stripes distance, so if you want the stripes to be farther away or less far away, you can change that. And then also the noise scale to just change the roughness noise. Then we also have the roughness to make the metal more shiny or more rough, and also the bump strength. And then also if you want to rotate the stripes around, there's going to be X, Y, and Z values to rotate the stripes around. If you'd like to help support the channel and purchase this material, then you can do that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description. And you can also check out my Blender procedural material packs if you'd like to purchase more of my materials. And if you'd like to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. All the links are in the description. And if you'd like to help support the channel here on YouTube, you can also check out the YouTube memberships by clicking down there on the join button next to the subscribe button. And you can also use the super thanks feature here on YouTube to send me a little tip if you enjoy this video. So let me just show you how I've set up the 3D viewport if you want to set it up the same way that I did. So I pressed Shift A, I went here to Mesh and I added a plane, and then I also pressed Shift A and I also added an icosphere, and then right behind me on the Add Icosphere settings, right after you add the icosphere, I'm going to open up the settings and I'm just going to turn the subdivisions up to 5, and then I'm going to shade the object smooth just so that I have a nice smooth sphere to preview the material on. Now, these default primitive objects in Blender are pretty big. They're a little bigger than the average human height, and so I want to make these smaller. So with both objects selected, I'm going to scale the objects by 0.2 and then enter. So now this is maybe roughly the size of like a beach ball. And then with both of these objects selected, I'm going to press Ctrl A and I'll just apply the scale. So this is now the object's new default size. And then so that the plane catches the light better, with both of these objects selected, I'm going to rotate them on the x-axis and I'll type in 90 and enter. And then I also added a camera and I just pointed the camera at the object. Now for the lighting, if you go over here to the world properties, I added in the Machine Shop 02 1K HDRI, and this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com, links in the description if you'd like to download it. And I downloaded the 1K HDR version. And then once you download the HDRI, right here on color, you can click on the yellow dot and you can choose environment texture, and then just click on open and open up the HDRI. And the HDRI will give us some nice realistic lighting and reflections on the material. And then I also wanted to add some more direct light, so I added this area light right here, and I kind of pointed the area light on the side, and I turned the power up to like 25 and just left it as a white color, and this will just add a bit more light to the scene. Now also, if you want to make the background transparent, you can click right over here on the render properties and open up the film tab, and you can checkmark the transparent button, and that way if you checkmark the transparent button, you won't be able to see the HDRI in the background. And then also to make the colors a bit nicer, if you open up the color management, you can use the view transform of Filmic, and the look here I set this to very high contrast to pop out the colors and make everything more saturated. So I am in the shader editor, so I have the 3D viewport right over here, and then I have the shader nodes right here. I'm just going to select the object and click on new to add a new material, and then I can just rename the material. And then I can also click and drag on the material drop down, and I can add the same material to this other object, so they both have the same material. And then I'm also going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on to preview the different nodes. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on Edit and go to the Preferences, and then over there on the Add-ons tab, just search for Node Wrangler and enable the Node Wrangler add-on. So the add-on is built into Blender, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So we're now going to start by creating a gradient, and we're going to use the gradient to create the stripes. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to start by searching for a math node. Let's just put the math node right here. And then I want to hold down the Control and Shift key and select the math node, and that is going to preview it. So that is using the feature of the Node Wrangler. If you Control, Shift, and select different objects, it's going to preview the node on the object. And then also with the math node with the add selected, I'm going to press Control T, and that is going to add the texture, coordinate, and mapping nodes, and it's also given us an image texture, but I don't want the image texture, so I'm going to select it and press X to delete it. And then let's take the vector, and I'm going to put that into the first value here on the add. Now to create the gradient, we are going to use the object coordinates. So let's put put the object into the vector of the mapping, and I can bring these kind of down here. So if I Control Shift and select the mapping node, you can see that the mapping node is going to have the vector coordinates, and it's going to have X, Y, and Z values. But to turn this into a black and white gradient, we're going to use the math node. So the vector is going into the value on the math node. And so if I Control Shift and select the math node, it's going to turn it into a black and white gradient, because these gray dots here, that is black and white data, but then this purple dot here, that is vector data. Now you can't really see the gradient, and that's because I need to move the gradient over. So what I'm going to do is select this mapping node, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's stick it after the first one. And we're going to use this mapping node to move the gradient up so you can actually see it, but then this mapping node is going to be used to change the entire scale of the texture. So right here on the second mapping, I can just change the scale. So if I click on the X scale and then drag down, I can then drag back and forth, and you can see I can just bring that up. So now you can see it. And I'm actually going to click, drag down, and then let go, and then I'm going to type in 20 and then enter, so that all the scale values are at 20. So now you can see we have a nice black and white gradient. Now I don't just want one stripe, I want many different stripes. So I'm going to click on the add node, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's stick it here. So we're going to put it after the first one. And then I'm going to click on add, and we're going to change this, and under rounding, I want to change this to the ping pong. So the ping pong sort of acts like a mirror. It kind of mirrors the texture. And so you can see it's black, then it goes to white, and then it goes to black. And if I change the scale here, that's going to change how many times it's ping ponging the values. And then if I change the value on the add node, that is going to change the offset of the stripes. But for now, I'll just leave them both at 0.5. Now you can see it's not very contrasty, it's very gray, and it's kind of blurred. So I want to make it more contrasty. So I'll press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I can search for the color ramp, and let's put the color ramp after the ping pong. So I can now drag these two values together, and if I drag them closer, it's going to make them more contrasty. So I can just drag this one to about here and the white one over here, and I want them to be about the same size, so I don't want to drag it over here or over here, because you can see it's not going to be the same size. I want the white and black stripes to be about the same size, so I'm just going to eyeball it and just place them about there, and I'll bring them pretty close to each other, not super close, but pretty close. So something like that's pretty good. So we now have the stripes texture. So what I can do is take the color ramp color, and I can put that into the base color of the principled shader. And then I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. Now there is one problem, and that is that I don't want white and black, I want yellow. So what I could do is just take the color ramp here, and I could just like turn this to a yellow color on this white tab, but I want to make this a custom node, and I want to have custom values. So instead, I'm going to use this color ramp as a factor in a mix node, and we're going to mix two different colors together instead of just changing the color ramp colors. So what I'm going to do is press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the mix node. Let's just drop the mix node down here. Now I don't want it to be set to float. I want to click on this, and I want to change this to color because we're working with color values. And then I can drop the mix right here between the color ramp and the principled. Now I want the color ramp values to control what parts are going to be color A and what parts are going to be color B. So I can take the color and I can put that into the factor. So now we have A and B, and then the factor is controlling where it's going to be A and where it's going to be B. So now I can just change the colors of A and B. So for A, I want to make that a very dark gray, and I don't want it to be fully black, because if it's fully black, I just find that it's too dark. So I'm just going to make it a very dark gray. And then here on B, I'm going to make this kind of a bright yellowish color, but slightly towards the orange. And if you want to use the same exact colors that I'm using, color A is going to be a hex value of 303030, and then color B is going to be a hex value of FFBE00. Those are the colors that I'm using. So now it looks like some caution stripes at maybe like a construction site or some equipment or something like that. Now it isn't actually metallic right now, so let's take the metallic value and turn that all the way up to 1. Now if you don't want it to be metallic and you just want it to look more like a plasticky material, you could leave the metallic down, but I do want this to look like metal, so I'll turn the metallic to 1. And then I can also turn the roughness down, and that'll make the metal more shiny, and that is looking really cool. Now right now the roughness is all even all around, and so the roughness is the same all over the metal, but I want some parts to be a little bit more rough and other parts to be a little bit more shiny. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the Musgrave texture, and we're going to put the Musgrave texture into the roughness to make some parts more rough and more shiny. And then also I want to take this mapping node here, the first one, and I want to put the vector into the Musgrave texture, and that way this mapping node can be used to scale the entire material. material. So then I can Control Shift and select the Musgrave texture to preview it. Now right here on the FBM, I want to change this type and I want to instead make it the multi-fractal. And then I want to turn the dimension down, so let's turn the dimension to 0, and you can see that a bit better. And then I also want to turn the detail up, so I'll turn the detail to the max of 15, and now you can see we have a really cool texture. And also I'm going to turn the scale down to just like a 0.5 because I do want it to be smaller. So I can now take the height of the Musgrave, and I can put that into the roughness of the principled shader, and I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. So now if I zoom in here, you can see some parts are really rough, whereas other parts are really shiny, because the black and white values are controlling where it's rough and where it's shiny. Now I want to control this better, so I can actually just click on the color ramp and I can press Shift D to duplicate it, and I'm just going to drop it here in between the Musgrave and the roughness. And then with this other color ramp selected, I can hit the backspace and that's going to reset the color ramp. So if I click on the white tab, if I make the white tab darker, you can see it's going to be more shiny. So if the colors are darker, they're going to be more shiny, but if they're lighter, they're going to be more rough. So now I can just play around with these values. I can play around with the two tabs, and I can make it more rough and more shiny. So I'll make this color over here kind of like a light gray, and this one is going to be a hex value of 959595, and then this one right over here on this side, this is going to be a slightly darker gray, and this hex value is 737373. If you want to use the same exact colors that I'm using, you can punch in those values. So now if I kind of zoom in closely there, you can see it does look kind of rough, but it still looks like a shiny metal. And then I also want to add just a tiny little bit of bump on the edges of the stripes. So let's take the color here from the color ramp, and I can put that into the normal. And then we need to convert this to normal data. You can see it's all black and there's some weird shading issues. That is because this is color data, but then this is normal data. So to convert it to normal data, let's press Shift A. I can go to the search and I can search for the bump node, and let's put the bump node in between the color ramp and the normal. And then we actually want it to be going into the height value. So you can put the color ramp into the height value and that'll convert it to normal data. So now you can see the edges look kind of bumpy, and that's a bit too strong. So on the bump strength here, I'm just going to turn that to like a 0.1 so it's less strong. But now it looks like those stripes are kind of bumping up a bit. And there we go. So there is the finished material. So if you want to end the tutorial here, you can, but I'm now going to show you how to join this together into a custom node with custom sliders. So what I can do is click and drag to box select all the nodes except the material output. I'm now going to press Control G, and Control G is going to join them together into a node group, and you can press the Tab key to go in and out of the node group. So I'll press Tab to go out of the node group, and I can drag this over here. I'm also going to drag this out a bit to make it a bit bigger, and then right here on the name, I can click on this and press Control C to copy the name, and on the node group here, I can press Control V to paste that. So now it's called Caution Stripes. So we can now add all the different custom values. So if I press the Tab key with the node group selected, that'll go into edit mode of the node group. Now, if I press the N key to open up the side panel, you can click here on the Group tab, and you can see there are inputs and outputs. And here on the outputs, I'm just going to rename the output to shader just because I like that a bit better. So right over here, you can see there is a group input, and so we can add all the values into the group input that we want to control. So the first thing that I want to control is the scale of the entire material. So let's take the scale here from the mapping and let's put that into the group input. And it's going to show up right here in the inputs. Now this is a purple dot here because it is vector data, but I don't want it to be using vector data because that's going to give us all three values. So the X, Y, and Z. I just want it to be one value. So right here, if you click on the scale, I want to click on the type and I'm going to change this to float. So this way it's going to be one single value. Now you can see the stripes have disappeared. That's because if I press the Tab key to go out of the node group, you can see the scale has been changed to 0. So I just need to click on the scale and turn it back to 1, which was the default. And now you can see that. And if I change the scale, you can see it's going to change the size of the material. So I can now tab to go back into the node group. So the next value that I want to add is the scale of just the stripes. So to do that, we can put this scale from the second mapping node into the group input. So let's put the scale into the group input, and then again I can click on this scale here, I can click on the type, and I can change it to float so it is one value. And then if I double click on the scale here to rename this, I want to rename this to stripes scale. Now you can see the stripes have disappeared again, so I just need a tab to go out of the node group, and then on the stripe scale I want to turn this back to the value that it was, and it was a value of 20. So now you can see the stripes, and I can just change this to change the stripe scale. Let's tab to go back into the group. So the next value that I want to change is the stripes offset, and this add node here is going to control that. So let's take the value of the add, and I can put this in here into the group input, and then I can double click on this to rename this, and I can rename this to stripes offset. Now if I change the ping pong scale, that is going to change the distance of the stripes. So I can take the scale, let's put that here into the group input, and then I can double click on this to rename this, and I can just rename this to stripes distance. Now I also want to change the noise scale, so we can take the Musgrave texture scale, we can put that into the group input, and then I can click on this to rename this, and I'm going to rename it to noise scale. And then I also want to control the roughness, but if you look right here, you can see that the color ramp is already going into the roughness, so we can't take the roughness and directly put that into the group input. But as I mentioned earlier, if you make the values lighter, they're going to be more rough, and if they're darker, they're going to be more shiny. So what I can do is press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the hue saturation value. And let's put the hue saturation value after the color ramp, but before the roughness. So if I change the value, I can turn the value up and down, and that'll make it lighter or darker. So I can take the value and I can bring that over and stick that in there. And then if I double click on this to rename this, I can just rename this to roughness because it's controlling the material's roughness. And then I also want to control the bump strength. So let's take the bump here. I can take the strength and let's put that into the group input, and I can rename this one to bump strength. And then just in case I want to rotate the stripes, I want to be able to control that. So this mapping node here, before the add, this rotation is going to control the rotation of the stripes. And we have X, Y, and Z. So I can take the rotation, let's put that into the group input, and then I want to double click on this to rename this, and I can rename it to stripes rotation. So if I press the tab key to go out of the node group, we have the X, the Y, and the Z, and you're probably mostly just going to use the Z because you'd probably put this on like a flat object, but just in case you want to change the X and Y, that's going to be right there. And then the one thing that we haven't added yet is the different colors. So let's tab to go back into the node group, and we have A and B here on the mix, so I can drag A, I'm going to put that here into the group input, and also we can take color B and I can put that into the group input. And then I want the colors to be on the very top, so I'm going to click on A here, and then I can click on the arrow and I can bring it all the way up to the top, and I can click on B and I can click on the arrow to kind of bring it up to the top, and then I can also just double click on these to rename these. So I'm going to rename it to color 1 and color 2 there on the inputs. So I can now tab to go out of the node group. And there we have it. So we now have the different colors to change the stripes. We also have some different scale values and the stripe offset, and we also have the stripe distance. Then we have the noise scale if you just want to change the size of the noise, and you can also change the roughness of the metal and also the bump strength, and then you can also rotate the stripes around. So that is it. That is how you turn this into a custom node. So thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you found it helpful, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you'd like to help support me and this YouTube channel and purchase the project files, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. Links are in the description. You can also purchase more of my materials by checking out my Blender procedural material packs. And if you'd like to learn how to create any of my materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist here on YouTube, where I have tutorials on all of my procedural materials. But I hope you found this helpful, and thank you for watching.